So, An African Millionaire, Part 2, the episode of the Diamond Links. Let us take a trip to Switzerland, said Lady Van Drift. Anyone who knows anything about Amelia would not be surprised to learn that we did take a trip to Switzerland accordingly. Nobody can drive Sir Charles except his wife, and nobody at all can drive Amelia. There were difficulties on the outset, because we had not ordered rooms at the hotels beforehand, and as it was well in on the season, but they were overcome at last by the usual application of a golden key. And we found ourselves in due time pleasantly quartered in Lucerne, at that most comfortable of the European hostelries, the Schweizerhof. We were a square party of 4, Sir Charles and Amelia, and myself and Isobel. We had nice big rooms on the first floor overlooking the lake, and as none of us had possessed with the faintest symptom of the incipient mania which shows itself in the form of an insane desire to climb a mountain of disagreeable steepness and unnecessary snowiness, I will venture to assert that we enjoyed ourselves. We spent most of our time sensibly and lounging about the lake on the jolly little steamers, and when we did a mountain climb, it was on the Rigier Pitelis, where an engine undertook all the muscular work for us. As usual, at the hotel, many miscellaneous people showed up with burning desire to be especially nice to us. If you wish to see how friendly and charming humanity is, just try being a well-known millionaire for a week, and you'll learn a thing or two. Wherever Sir Charles goes, he is surrounded by charming and disinterested people, all eager to make his distinguished acquaintance, and all familiar with several excellent investments or several deserving objects of Christian charity. And it is in my business of life, and his brother-in-law and secretary, to decline with thanks the excellent investments, and to throw judicious cold water on the objects of charity. Even I myself, as the great man's almoner, am very much sought after. People casually allude before me to artless stories of poor curates in Cumberland, you know, Mr. Whitworth, or widows in Cornwall, penniless poets with epics in their desks, and young painters in need but the breath of a patron to open up the doors to admiring academy. I smile and look wise while I administer cold water in the minute doses, but I never report one of these cases to Sir Charles, except in the rare, almost unheard of events where I think it is really something in them. Ever since our little adventure with the seer and nice, Sir Charles, who's constitutionally cautious, had been even more careful about the possible sharpers. And, as chance would have it, there sat just opposite us, at a table hotel at the Schweizerhof, 'tis the fad of Amelia's to dine with table d'hôte. She says she can bear to be boxed up all day in private rooms with too much family. A sinister-looking man with dark hair and eyes, conspicuous by his bushy, overhanging eyebrows. My attention was first called to the eyebrows in question by a nice little parson who sat at our side, and who observed that they were made up of certainly large and bristly hairs, which, he told us, had been traced by Darwin to our monkey ancestors. A very pleasant little fellow, this fresh-faced young parson on his honeymoon tour with a nice wee wife, a bonny Scotch lassie with a charming accent. I looked at the eyebrows close, and then a sudden thought struck me. Do you believe they're his own? I asked of the curate. Or are they only stuck on as a make-up disguise? They really almost look like it. You don't suppose, Charles began, and checked himself suddenly. Yes, I do, I answered. The seer. Then I recollected my blunder and looked down sheepishly, for, to say the truth, Vandriff had straightfully enjoyed on me long before, to say nothing of our painful little episode of nice to Amelia. He was afraid if she heard it, he would never hear the end of it again after. What seer? The little parson inquired, with personal curiosity. I noticed the man with the overhanging eyebrows give a queer sort of start. Charles's glance was fixed upon me. I hardly knew what to answer. Oh, a man who was nice with us last year, I stammered out, trying hard to look unconcerned. A fellow they all talked about, that's all. I turned the subject. But the curate, like a donkey, wouldn't let me turn it. He had eyebrows like that? He inquired in undertone. I was really angry. If this was Colonel Clay, the curate was obviously giving him a clue, and making it much more difficult for us to catch him. Now we might possibly have lighted on the chance of doing so. No, I hadn't, I answered testily. It was a passing expression, but this is not the man. I am mistaken, no doubt. And I nudged him gently. The little curate was too innocent for anything. Oh, I see, he replied, nodding and hard and looking wise. But then he turned to his wife and made an obvious face which the man with the eyebrows couldn't fail to notice. Fortunately, the political discussion going on in a few places further down the table spread up to us and diverted attention for the moment. The magical name of Gladstone saved us. Sir Charles flared up. I was truly pleased, for I could see Amelia was boiling over with curiosity by the time. After dinner, in the billiard room, however, the man with the big eyebrows sidled up and began to talk to me. If he was Colonel Clay, it was evidently he bore us no grudge at the fire for the £5,000 which he had done out of us. On the contrary, he seemed quite prepared to do us out of 5,000 more when the opportunity offered. For he introduced himself at once as Dr. Hector Macpherson, the exclusive grantee of extensive concessions for the Brazilian government upon the upper Amazons. He dived into conversation with me at once as to the splendid mineral resources of his Brazilian estate, the silver, the platinum, the actual rubies, and the possible diamonds. I listened and smiled. I knew what was coming. All he needed to develop his magnificent concession was a little more capital. It was sad to see thousands of pounds worth of platinum and carloads of rubies just crumbling in the soil or carried away by the river, for want of a few hundreds to work them properly. If he knew of anybody now with money to invest, he could recommend them, nay, offer them a unique opportunity of earning, say, 40% on his capital, on unimpeachable security. I would do it for every man, Dr. Hector Macpherson remarked, drawing himself up, but I took a fancy to the fellow who had the command of ready cash. I might choose to put him in the way of feathering his nest with unexampled rapidity. Exceedingly disinterested of you, I answered dryly, fixing my eyes on his eyebrows. The little curate, meanwhile, was playing billiards with Sir Charles. His glance followed mine as he rested it for a moment on the monkey-like hairs. False, obviously false, he remarked with his lips, and I'm bound to confess I never saw any man speak so well by movement alone. You could follow every word, though not a sound escaped him. During the rest of that evening, Dr. Hector Macpherson stuck to me as close as mustard plaster, and he was almost as irritating. I got heartily sick of the upper Amazons. I have positively waded in my time with the ruby mines, in prospectuses, I mean, till the mere sight of a ruby absolutely sickens me. When Charles, in an unwanted fit of generosity, gave his sister, Isobel, to whom I had the honor of marry, a ruby necklace, inferior stones, I made Isobel change it for sapphires and amethysts on the judicious plea that they suited her complexion better. I scored 1, incidentally, for having considered Isabel's complexion. By the time I went to bed, I was prepared to sink the upper Amazons into the sea, and to stab, shoot, poison, or otherwise seriously damage the man with the concession and the false eyebrows. For the next 3 days, at intervals, he returned to the charge. He bored me to death with his platinum and his rubies. He didn't want a capitalist who could personally exploit the thing. He would prefer to do it all on his own account, giving the capitalist preference to the debentures of his bogus company and a lien on the concession. I listened and smiled. I listened and yawned. I listened and was rude. I ceased to listen at all, but still he droned on with it. I fell asleep on the steamer one day and woke up in 10 minutes to hear him droning yet. And the yield of platinum per ton was certified to be... I forget how many pounds or ounces or pennyweights. These details, I would say, have ceased to interest me, like the man who didn't believe in ghosts. I have seen too many of them. The fresh-faced little curate and his wife, however, were quite the different people. He was a cricketing Oxford man. She was this breezy Scotch lash, with a wholesome breath of the Highlands about her. I called her White Heather. Their name was Brasbison, millionaires who are accustomed to being beset by harpies of every description, that when they come across a young couple who are simple and natural, they delight in the purity of human relation. We picnicked and went on excursions a great deal with the honeymooners. They were so frank in their young love, and so proof against chaff, that we really all liked them. But wherever I called the pretty girl White Heather, she looked so shocked and cried, "Oh, Miss Wentworth!" Still, we were the best of friends. The curate offered to row us in a boat on the lake one day, while the Scotch lassie assured us she would take an oar almost as well as he did. However, we did not accept their offer, as rowboats exert an unfavorable influence upon Amelia's digestive organs. "Nice young fellow, that Brasbison," Sir Charles said to me one day, as we lounged together on the quay. "Never talks about advowsons or the next presentations. Doesn't seem to me to care 2 pins about promotion. Says he's quite content with his country currency, enough to live upon, and needs no more. And his wife has a little, very little money. I asked him about his pool today, and proposed to test him. Those parsons are always trying to screw something out of someone or one of their pool. Men in my position know the truth of the saying that we have the class of the population always with us. But would you believe it, he says that he hasn't any poor at all in his parish. They're all well-to-do farmers, or else well-able-bodied laborers. And his one terror is that someday someone will try to pauperize them. If a philanthropist were to give me £50 today and use it at Eppingham," he said, "I assure you, Sir Charles, I shouldn't know what to do with it. I think I should buy new dresses for Jessie, who wants them about as much as anybody else in the village. That is to say, not at all. There's a parson for you, say, my boy. I only wish we had one of this sort in Selden." "He certainly doesn't want to get anything out of you," I answered. That evening at dinner, a queer little episode happened. The man with the eyebrows began talking to me across the table in his usual fashion, full of his wearisome concession about the upper Amazons. I was trying to squash him as quietly as possible when I caught Amelia's eye. Her look amused me. She was engaged in making signals to Charles at her side to observe the little curate's curious sleeve links. I glanced at them and saw at once they were a singular possession to an unobtrusive person. They consisted each of a short gold bar with one arm and link, fastened by a tiny chain to the same material to what seemed to be a tolerably experienced eye. A first-rate diamond. Pretty big diamonds, too, and of remarkable shape and brilliancy and cutting. In a moment, I knew what Amelia meant. She owned a diamond revers, said to be of Indian origin, but short by 2 stones for the circumference of her tolerably ample neck. Now she had long been wanting 2 diamonds like these to match her sets, but owing to the usual shape and antiquated cutting of her own gems, she had never been able to complete the necklace. At least, not without removing an extravagant amount for a much larger stone at the first water. The Scotch lass's eyes caught Amelia's at the same time, and she broke into a pretty smile of good-humored amusement. "Take it in another person, Dick dear," she exclaimed in her breezy way, turning to her husband. "Lady Vandrift is observing your diamond sleeve links." "They're very fine gems," Amelia observed incautiously. Most unwise admission if she desired to buy them. But the little pleasant curate was too transparently simple a soul to take advantage of her slip of judgment. "They are good stones," he replied. "Very good, considering. They're not diamonds at all, to tell you the truth. They're the best old-fashioned oriental paste. My great-grandfather bought them after a siege of Seringapatam for a few rupees, from a sepoy who had looted them from Tipu Sultan's palace. He thought, like you, he had got a good thing, but it turned out, when they came to be examined by experts, they were only paste. A very wonderful paste. I suppose that they are even imposed upon Tipu himself, so fine is the imitation, but they're worth, well, say, 50 shillings at the utmost." When he spoke, Charles looked at Amelia, and Amelia looked at Charles. Their eyes spoke volumes. The rivalry was also supposed to have come from Tipu's collection. Both drew at once the identical conclusion. These were 2 of the same stones, very likely torn apart and disengaged from the rest of the melee in the capture of the Indian palace. "Can you take them off?" Sir Charles asked finally. He spoke in a tone that indicates business. "Certainly," the little curate answered, smiling. "I'm accustomed to taking them off. They're always noticed. They've been kept in the family ever since the siege, a sort of valueless heirloom for the sake of the picturesqueness of the story, you know, and nobody ever sees them without asking, as you do, to examine them closely. They deceive even experts at first, but they're just paste, all the same. Unmitigated oriental paste, for all that." He took them both off and handed them to Charles. "No man in England has a finer judge of gems than my brother-in-law. I watched him narrowly. He examined them close, first with the naked eye, and then with the little pocket lens which he always carries. Admirable imitation," he muttered, passing them to Amelia. "I'm not surprised they should impose upon inexperienced observers." But from the tone in which he said it, I could see at once that he had satisfied himself that they were real gems of unusual value. I know Charles's way of doing business so well. His glance to Amelia meant that these very stones had been so long been in search of. The Scotch lassie laughed a merry laugh. "He sees through them now, Dick," she cried. "I felt for sure Charles would be a judge of diamonds." Amelia turned them over. I know Amelia, too. I knew from the way Amelia looked at them that she meant to have them. And when Amelia means to have anything, people who stand in the way may as well spare themselves the trouble of opposing her. They were beautiful diamonds. We found out afterwards that the little curate's account was quite correct. These stones had come from the same necklace as Amelia's reverie, made from his favorite wife of Tipu's, who had presumably an expansive personal charms of her beloved sister-in-law. More perfect diamonds have seldom been seen. They have excited the usual admiration of thieves and connoisseurs. Amelia told me afterwards that, according to legend, the sepoy stole the necklet from the sack of the palace and then fought with another for it. It was believed that 2 stones got split in the scuffle and were picked up and sold by a third person, an onlooker, who had no idea of the value of his booty. Amelia had been hunting for them for several years to complete her necklet. "They are excellent paste," Sir Charles said, observing them, handing them back. "It takes a first-rate judge to detect them from the reality. Lady Vandrift has a necklet of much the same in character, but supposed of genuine stones. And as these are so much like them, and would complete her sets to all of the outward appearance, I wouldn't mind giving you, say, £10 for the pair of them. Mrs. Brabazon looked delighted. Oh, sell them to him, Dick, she cried. And buy me a brooch with the money. A pair of common links would do you just as well. £10 for 2 paste tones. It's quite a lot of money. She said it so sweetly in her pretty Scotch accent that I couldn't imagine how Dick had the heart to refuse her. But he did, all the same. No, Jess, darling, he answered. They're worthless, I know, but they have a certain sentimental value, as I've often told you. My dear mother wore them while she lived as earrings, and as soon as she died I had them brought as a set of links in order that I might always keep them about me. Besides, they have historical and family interests. Even a worthless heirloom, after all, is an heirloom. Dr. Hector McPherson looked across and intervened. There's a part on my concession, he said, where we have a reason to believe a perfectly new Kimberley will soon be discovered. If at any time you care, Sir Charles, to look at my diamonds when I get them, it would afford me the greatest pleasure in life to submit them to your consideration. Sir Charles could stand it no longer. Sir, he said, gazing across at him with an earnest air, if your consideration were as full as the diamonds of Sinbad the sailor's valley, I would not care to turn my head to look at them. I am acquainted with the nature of the practice of salting. And he glared at the man with the overhanging eyebrows, as if he would devour him raw. Poor Dr. Hector McPherson subsided instantly. We learnt a little later that he was a harmless lunatic who went about the world with successive concessions for ruby mines and platinum reefs, because he had been ruined and driven mad by speculations of the two, and had recouped himself by imaginary grants in Burma and Brazil, or anywhere else that turned up handy. And his eyebrows, after all, were of nature's handicraft. They were sorry for the incident, but the man in Sir Charles's possession is such a mark for rogues that if he did not take means to protect himself promptly, he would be forever overrun by them. When we went up to our salon that evening, Amelia flung herself on the sofa. Charles, she spoke out in the voice of tragedy queen, those are real diamonds, and I shall never be happy again until I get them. They are real diamonds, Charles echoed. And you shall have them, Amelia. They're worth not less than £3,000. But I shall bid them up gently. So, next day, Charles set to work to haggle with the curate. Brabazon, however, didn't care to be part with him. He was no money grubber, he said, and he cared more for his mother's gift and family tradition than a few £100, if Sir Charles were to offer it. Charles's eye gleamed. But if I offer you 200, he said insinuatingly, what opportunities for good? You could build a new wing to your village schoolhouse. We have ample accommodation, the curate answered. No, I don't think I'll sell them. Still, his voice faltered somewhat, and he looked down at them inquiringly. Charles was too precipitate. £200 more or less matters little to me, he said. And my wife has set her heart on them. It's every man's duty to please his wife, isn't it? Mrs. Brabazon, I offer you 300. The little Scotch girl clasped her hands. 300? Oh, Dick, just think of what fun we could have, and what good we could do with it. Do let them have him. Her accent was irresistible, but the curate shook his head. Impossible, he answered. My mother's earrings. Uncle Aubrey would be so angry if he knew that I sold them. Or I daren't face Uncle Aubrey. He has expectations from Uncle Aubrey? Sir Charles asked the White Heather. Mrs. Brabazon laughed. Uncle Aubrey? Oh, dear no.
Poor dear old Uncle Aubrey, why the darling old soul hasn't a penny to bless himself with except his pension. He's a retired post captain.
And she laughed melodiously. She was a charming woman. Then I should disregard Uncle Aubrey's feelings, Sir Charles said decisively. Oh, no, the curate answered. Poor dear Uncle Aubrey. I wouldn't do anything that would annoy him. He'd be sure to notice it. We went back to Amelia.
Well, have you got them?
She asked. No, Sir Charles answered. Not yet. But he's coming around, I think. He's hesitating now. He would rather like to sell them himself, but is afraid what Uncle Aubrey would say about the matter. His wife will talk him out of the needless consideration of Uncle Aubrey's feelings, and tomorrow we'll finally clinch the bargain. Next morning we stayed late in our salon, when we always breakfast, and did not come down to the public rooms till just after déjeuner, Sir Charles being busy with me over means of correspondence. We did come down. The concierge stepped forward and twisted a little feminine note to Amelia. She took it and read it. Her countenance fell.
There, Charles, she cried, handing it to him. You've let the chance slip. I shall never be happy now. They've gone off with the diamonds.
Charles seized the note and read it. And then he passed it on to me. It was short, but final. Thursday,
6 a.m. Dear Lady Vandrift, will you kindly excuse us having left so hurriedly without bidding you goodbye? We have just had a horrid telegram for Dick's favorite sister is dangerously ill, fever in Paris. I wanted to shake hands with you before we left. You've been all too sweet to us, and we will go by morning train absurdly early, and I wouldn't want the world to disturb you. Perhaps some day we meet again, though, buried as we are in the North Country village, it isn't likely. But in any case, you have secured a grateful recollection. Yours truly, Jessie Barberton. Yes, kindest regards to Sir Charles and the dear Wentworths, and a kiss for yourself, if I may venture to send you one. She doesn't even mention where they've gone,
Amelia exclaimed in a very bad humor.
The concierge may know,
Isobel suggested, looking over my shoulder. We asked at the office. Yes, the gentleman's address was Reverend Richard Pelope Brazelton, Home Bush Cottage, Eppingham, Northumberland. Any address where the papers might be sent at once in Paris. For the next 10 days, or till further notice, Hotel des Trois Mondes, Avenue de l'Arbre. Amelia's mind had been made up at once.
Strike while the iron's hot, she cried. The sudden illness coming at the end of their honeymoon, involving 10 days' stay in an expensive hotel, will probably upset the curate's budget. He'll be glad to sell now. He'll get them for 300. It was absurd of Charles to offer so much at first, but offered once, of course, we must stick to it.
What do you propose to do? Charles asked. Write or telegraph?
Oh, how silly men are,
Amelia cried.
Is this the sort of business that can be arranged by letter and still less by telegram? No, Seymour must start off at once, taking the night train to Paris. And the moment he gets there, he must interview the curator, Miss Bresberton. Miss Bresberton's the best. She has none of the stupid sentimental nonsense about Uncle Aubrey.
It is no part of a secretary's duties to act as a diamond broker. But when Amelia puts her foot down, she puts her foot down. A fact which she is unnecessarily fond of emphasizing in that identical proposition. So the self-same evening saw me safe in the train on my way to Paris. The next morning I turned out of my comfortable sleeping car at the Carré de Strasbourg. My orders were to bring back those diamonds, alive or dead, so to speak, in my pockets to Lucerne, and to offer any needful sum, up to £2,500, for their immediate purchase. When I arrived at the Diamonds, I found the poor little curate and his wife both greatly agitated. They had sat up all night, they said, and their invalid sister and the sleeplessness and suspense certainly told upon them after being on their long railway journey. They were pale and tired. Mrs. Brasbillon, in particular, looking ill and worried, too much like White Heather. I was more than half ashamed of bothering them about the diamonds at such a moment. But it occurred to me that Amelia was probably right. They would now have reached the end of the sum set apart for their continental trip, and a little ready cash might be far from unwelcome. I broached the subject delicately. It was a fad of Lady Vandrift's, I said. She had set her heart upon those useless trinkets, and she wouldn't go without them. She must and would have them, but the curate was obdurate. He threw Uncle Aubrey in my teeth. 300? No, never. A mother's present. Impossible, dear Jessie. Jessie begged and prayed. She had known and grown really attached to Lady Vandrift, she said, but the curate wouldn't hear of it. I went up tentatively to 400. He shook his head gloomily. It wasn't a question of money, he said. It was a question of affection. I saw it was no use trying to attack any longer. I struck out a new line. These stones, I said, I think I ought to inform you, are really diamonds. Sir Charles is certain of it. Now, it is right for a man of your possessions to be wearing a pair of big gems like those worth several £100s as ordinary sleeve links. A woman, yes, I grant you. For a man, is it manly? And you a cricketer. He looked at me and laughed. Will nothing convince you, he cried. They've been examined and tested by half a dozen jewelers, and we know them to be paste. It wouldn't be right of me to sell them to you under false pretenses, however unwilling on my side. I couldn't do it. Well then, I said, going up a bit in my bids to meet them, I will put it like this. These gems are paste, but Lady Vandrift is quite unconquerable and unaccountable desire to possess them. Money doesn't matter to her. She is a friend of your wife's. As a personal favor, won't you sell them to her for 1,000? He shook his head. It would be wrong, he said. It might even add criminal. But we take all risk, I cried. He was absolutely adamant. As a clergyman, he answered, I cannot do it. Will you try, Miss Brasbillon? I asked. The pretty little Scotswoman leaned over and whispered. She coaxed and cajoled him. Her ways were winsome. I couldn't hear what she said, but he seemed to give way at last. I should love Lady Cranfield to have them, she murmured, turning to me. She is such a dear. Then she took out the links from her husband's cuff and handed them across to me. How much? I asked. 2,000, she answered interrogatively. There was a big rise all at once, but such are the ways of women. Done, I said. Do you consent? The curate looked up as if ashamed of himself. I consent, he said slowly, since Jessie wishes it. But as a clergyman, and to prevent any further misunderstanding, I should like to give you a statement, in writing, that you buy them on my distinct and positive declaration that they are made of paste, old Oriental paste, and not genuine stones, that I do not claim any other qualities of them. I popped the gems into my purse, well pleased. Certainly, I said, pulling out a paper. Charles, with the unerring business instinct, had anticipated the request and given me a signed agreement to that effect. Will you take a check? I inquired. He hesitated. Notes of the Bank of France would suit me better, he answered. Very well, I will go out and get them. How very unsuspicious some people are. He allowed me to go off, with the stones in my pocket. Sir Charles had given me a blank check, not exceeding £2,500. I took it to our agents and cashed it for notes for the Bank of France. The curate classed them with pleasure, and right glad I was to go back to Lucerne that night. feeling that I had got those diamonds into my hands for £1,000 under their real value. At Lucerne railway station, Amelia met me. She was positively agitated.
"Have you brought them, Seymour?"
she asked. "Yes," I answered, producing the spoils in triumph.
"Oh, how dreadful!" she cried, drawing back. "Do you think they're real? Are you sure he hasn't cheated you?"
"Certain of it," I replied, examining them. "No one can take me in the matter of diamonds. Why on earth should you doubt them?"
"Because I've been talking to Miss O'Hannigan at the hotel. She says there's a well-known trick just like that. She's read of it in a book. The swindler has 2 sets, one real, one false. It makes you buy the false ones by showing you the real and pretending he sells them as a special favor."
"You needn't be alarmed," I answered. "I'm a judge of diamonds."
"I shan't be satisfied," Amelia murmured, "till Charles has seen them."
We went up to the hotel. For the first time in her life, I saw Amelia really nervous as I handed the stones to Charles to examine. Her doubt was contagious. I half feared myself he might break into a deep monosyllabic interjection, losing his temper in haste, as he often does when things go wrong. But he looked at them with a smile, while I told him the price. £800 less than their value, he answered, well satisfied. "You have no doubt of the reality?" I asked. "Not in the slightest," he replied, gazing at them. "They are genuine stones, precisely in the same quality and type of Amelia's necklet." Amelia drew a sigh of relief.
"I'll go upstairs," she said, slowly. "Bring down my own, for you both to compare of them."
1 minute later, she rushed down breathless, Amelia so far from slim, and I never knew her before to exert herself to activity.
"Charles, Charles," she replied, "do you know what dreadful thing has happened? 2 of my own stones are gone. He's stolen a couple of diamonds from my necklace and sold them back to me."
She held out the reverie. It was all too true. 2 gems were missing, and these 2 just fitted the empty places. A light broke in upon me. I clapped my hands to my head. "By Jove!" I exclaimed. "The little curate is Colonel Clay." Charles clapped his own hand to his brow in turn. "And Jessie," he cried. "White Heather, that sweet innocent Scotchman. I once detected a familiar ring in her voice, in spite of the charming Highland accents. Jessie is Madame Pickardette." We had obviously no evidence, but like the commissary at Nice, we felt instinctively sure of it. Sir Charles was determined to catch the rogue. His second depiction put him on his mettle. "The worst of the man is," he said, "he has a method. He doesn't go out of his way to cheat us. He makes us go out of our ways to be cheated. He lays a trap and we tumble headlong into it. Tomorrow, say, we must follow him to Paris." Amelia explained to him what Miss Hannigan had said. Charles took it all in at once, and said sagaciously, "That explains," he said, "why the rascal used a particular trick to draw on us by. If we had suspected him, he could have shown the diamonds were real, so escaped detection. There was a blind draw of us to fact the robbery. We went to Paris to be out of the way when the discovery was made, and to get a clear day's start of us. What a consummate rogue! And to do me twice running!"
"How did it get into my jewel case, though?"
Amelia exclaimed. "That's the question," Charles answered. "You do leave it about so."
"And why didn't he steal the whole reverie at once and sell other gems?" I inquired.
"Too cunning," Charles replied. "This was much better business. It isn't easy to dispose of a big thing like that. In the first place, the stones are large and valuable. In the second place, they're well known. Every dealer has heard of the Vandrift Reverie and seen pictures of the shape of them. They're marked gems, so to speak. No, he played a better game. He took a couple of them off and offered them to the only one person on the earth who was likely to buy them without suspicion. They came here meaning to work this very trick. He had the links made right before the stone beforehand, and then stole the stones and slipped them into their places. It's a wonderfully clever trick. Upon my soul, I almost admire the fellow. For Charles is a businessman himself, and can appreciate business and capacity of others. How Colonel Clay came to know about the necklace and the appropriate two of the stones we only discovered much later. I will not anticipate that disclosure, for one thing at a time is a good rule in life. For the moment, he succeeded in baffling us altogether. However, we followed him to Paris, telegraphing beforehand to the Bank of France to stop the notes. It was all in vain. They had been cashed within half an hour of my paying them. The curate and his wife, we found, quitted the Hotel de Dos Mondes for parts unknown the same afternoon. And, as usual with Colonel Clay, they vanished into space, leaving no clue behind them. In other words, they changed their disguise, no doubt, and reappeared somewhere else that night in altered characters. At any rate, no such person as Reverend Richard Philip Parson was afterwards heard of, and, for the matter of that, no such village exists as Eppingham, Northumberland. We communicated the matter to the Parisian police. They were most unsympathetic. It is no doubt Colonel Clay, the officials whom we saw, but you seem to be little off ground of complaint against him. As far as I can see, monsieur, there is not much to choose between you. Monsieur le Chevalier desired to buy diamonds at the price of paste. You, madame, feared that you bought paste at the price of diamonds. You, monsieur, the secretary, tried to get the stones for an unsuspecting person for half their value. He took you all in, and that brave Colonel Cataract, it was diamond cut diamond. Which was true, no doubt, but by no means consoling. We returned to the Hotel Grand. Charles was fuming with indignation. This is really too much, he exclaimed. What an audacious rascal! But he will never again take me in, my dear say. I only hope we will try again. I would love to catch him. I know another time, for sure, in spite of her disguises. It's absurd my being tricked twice running like this, but never again while I live. Never again, I declare to you. Jean de la Ville, a courtier in the hall, close by, murmured, responsive. We stood under the veranda at the Grand Hotel, in a big glass courtyard, and I verily believe the courtier was really Colonel Clay himself, in one of his disguises. But perhaps we were beginning to suspect him everywhere.